Hey everyone, this is Will from Beijing, China, and welcome to this brand new and exciting episode of The Missing Piece. If you follow the news closely, that you know the country of France just successfully elected a brand new president. Well, he is not really new to the country, but the good news is Emmanuel Macron is able to carry on another 5 years, continue to be the leader of the nation. And given the fact that after this election, people begin to realize that how critical and important to have this open political agenda. As a matter of fact, for so long that Macron has been rooting for this agenda, which he called the anti-establishment in the country of France. Now, in this episode, we don't need to talk about the country of France, and given the fact, there's still a lot more to-do lists. But meanwhile, let's shift our gear to the country of Japan, which is strategically located in the continent of Asia. Since the pandemic, and we know that economically speaking and politically speaking, every single country has experienced these ups and downs for the last 2 years, especially regarding this political and social changes in the country of Japan. And it's even more important to talk to the younger generations what they're seeing in this new leader, and most importantly, how this new leader is going to bring changes politically and economically for the country, and especially for the younger generations. So that's why today, Will, it's very honored to invite a distinguished speaker to join the episode and to share more details with us. Now with us right now, it's Alan, all the way from Japan. Alan, welcome to The Missing Piece.
Great. It's nice meeting you.
Absolutely, the pleasure is all mine. Now, Alan, before we get started, can you briefly introduce who you are to our audience?
Okay. Hi, how are you? I'm Alan Yokibe from Tokyo, and I'm a senior student in University of Tokyo and the Department of Economics. And basically, I'm an entrepreneur, and I was building a new company 2 years ago about educational technology. But also basically, I'm kind of a student in economic department. So yes, and also I'm interested in the international relationship. Yes.
Thank you, Alan. Now, absolutely. Now, let's get started. Again, Alan, as I mentioned in the intro, I think it's fair to say that this pandemic absolutely, and no doubt, that changed the entire world, and especially for the countries in Asia. Again, as I mentioned before, Japan, it's one of the countries strategically located in the continent of Asia. So from your perspective, how would you describe this general economic atmosphere in Japan today, especially under the pandemic?
Thank you. So basically, first of all, I have to mention about the deflation in Japan. It's a very constructional problem issues in Japanese economics. And even before the pandemic, Japanese economics was not so good in terms of the deflation. And basically COVID-19 amplifies the risk and the deep issues of economics. So that's why right now the economics is not so good. And also the COVID-19 is also a very important factor. And also right now the Ukraine issue also has a pretty influential to Japanese economics. So for example, like Japanese yen is very cheap right now. And that is because of the Ukraine issue and the interest rate. And first of all, the Ukraine issue, raise the price, right? Basically for example, food and the natural resource. And that's why, so for example, US or other country raise the interest rate. But Japanese central bank never raised the interest rate. So that's why Japanese yen gonna be cheaper and cheaper. And it's very influential because it's been it is pretty difficult and too expensive for Japanese company and Japanese government, Japanese people to buy the natural resource from other country. because just in Japan, like there are lack of the natural resource, right? And also food is the same situation. So that's why the Japanese situation is pretty tough in terms of the economics right now.
Alan, I am very glad that you brought the country of Ukraine into the picture. And again, if I'm not mistaken, among all the countries in Asia, Japan was actually the few countries in Asia strongly condemned this war criminal behavior, not only towards Vladimir Putin, but also condemned such military invasion to the country of Ukraine and also to this people. Now, from your perspective, why do you think it's so important for the Japanese government to come out to condemn such behavior? So in other words, why is it so interesting for the Japanese government to say such political words or to show such political opinions in the midst of the whole uncertainty? Because we know that Russia, it's a rising country and it's really difficult to criticize, or even it's difficult to understand this political strategy behind the leader. Why would you think that Japanese government is interested in taking that approach?
Okay, it is very, very important question. And actually, even for Japanese government, it's also very, very difficult to predict the behavior and the future of the relationship between Russia and the international community. And so basically, the main reason is imagine like just following to the US and the European countries. Because, it's very important for the Japanese to show that the changing the status quo by force is very bad things for another big country, for other big country. So that's why I imagine it's pretty important for the Japanese government to condemn the Putin and the Russia. But, I also want to say the risk of the sanction, because the Japanese government, like Japan, is pretty dependent on the Russia in terms of the natural resource, right, and the rare matter. And, for example, palladium is very, very important part and important material to purify the gasoline car. And car industry is the main industry, right? And most important industry in Japan in terms of the amount of the sales. So the palladium is very important. Also, and LNG is a very, very essential to the Japanese energy production, right? Especially the Japanese is seeking for Japan is seeking for the carbon zero, right? Zero emission until 2015. And it's a promise in international community. And in order to achieve this goal, the LNG is a very, very important, right? So right now, the Japanese, for Japanese company and Japan, the Sakhalin-2 is the project name in Sakhalin to get the LNG is a very important. So I think, the more and more and deeper sanction gonna be the kind of a risk in terms of the energy, right? So right now the Japan try to keep and maintain the rights of Sakhalin-2, but I'm not sure, but Russia are likely to expel the Japan from the Sakhalin-2 project and invite other countries. So it's also risk. So there is a big dilemma between the international community and the energy issues.
Alan, I want to go back to something so critical to the country of Japan. Again, we started the conversation on economy. And we know even before the pandemic took place, under the previous Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, and Abe faced a lot more criticism regarding the way that he handled the economic shift. And again, I'm not saying that Japan is a small country. I mean, it is not. And of course, that when we talk about this economic growth before the pandemic, if I'm not mistaken, I think Japan was on this slow pace. So in other words,
Yes,
it was very slow. And I think the younger generations, again, you're one of them, were getting very irritated and impatient to see this economic growth. But so I guess that could be one of the reasons why that Shinzo Abe, he resigned or he decided not to carry on this political career. But right now, fast forward, we're looking at a brand new leader. So Alan, from your perspective, how would you analyze this economic differences between Shinzo Abe and this current leader? That's number one. And number two is, under this new leader, under this new prime minister, how have you seen any changes in this economic growth, especially domestically for the younger generations?
Okay, thank you. So first of all, I want to point out what the younger generations do for the Liberal Democratic Party. Liberal Democratic Party is the main party right now. And Shinzo Abe and Kishida belongs to this party. And basically, the younger generation tend to support the main party because there is no options. There is no alternatives, right? So basically, other party is very, very, how can I say, weak. So the younger generation have no choice but to support the main party. Is a kind of a big problem in Japan. But the basically younger generation supports the Liberal Democratic Party. And okay, so in terms of the first question, so where is the difference between the Shinzo Abe and the Kishida, right? And actually, I don't feel there any difference. So basically the Kishida usually follows Abe Shinzo's policy in terms of the economic. And as you may know, the Kishida built and shows the new capitalism as a kind of propaganda to be elected in the leader of Liberal Democratic Party. But actually, what is a new capitalism? Is that this definition is a pretty ambiguous, and actually nobody can understand. Nobody can have a clear-cut image of the new capitalism. So basically, the Kishida. First of all, Kishida said, "Okay, we will do a new capitalism." And after this saying, he just starts thinking about what is the definition of the new capitalism, and builds a kind of a committee to think about the definition of new capitalism. So it's very ambiguous. And so basically, in terms of the new capitalism, the Kishida emphasized the growth and distribution is very important, right? It's not same as mainstream of the economic policy. So it's still very ambiguous. And also the Kishida don't want to take a risk until the next election. And next election gonna be this summer. So I imagine, and the many scholars analyze, the Kishida won't take a risk and won't reform greatly until this summer. So I think it is pretty difficult to see the difference between the Abe Shinzo and Kishida right now. And also related to the second question, the younger generation can't see the power of reform of the economic part in terms of the economic policy. This is right now situation. Yeah.
Alan, again, despite this ambiguity, from the current leader, again, this is something what you called the new capitalism. And we know that, given the fact that the relationship between China and the U.S. today, I think in the midst of the whole Ukrainian war, it's standing at the crossroads. And of course that, you follow international relations and, international affairs closely. We know that back in the days when Donald Trump was the president, and he actually started this political or this how can I say, fearless talk, to make China accountable, and in terms of building this trade relationship, or make sure China paid everything that the country is supposed to. Now, the country of Japan, it's actually caught in the middle. Because on one side, if you see, or if we say that this leader in Japan is going to build this new capitalism, now, my question is, does that decision, or would you say this decision could be easily influenced by the Western Hemisphere? And that's number one. And number two is, how would you think that Japan is handling, again, not political, but only this economic relationship with US and with China? Because again, no country today would prefer being caught in the middle between these two largest economic powers. So what do you think?
I don't think the Japanese economic policy can be influential. Yeah. And yeah, you can see the very, the cheap Japanese yen. And also, in terms of the economic, I think the Japanese economic is pretty stable, very stable. And it's in the good sense and the bad sense, right? The Japanese economic is very stable, so I think it's a little influential to the Western country right now. Yeah, of course. In terms of the economics, industry, the Japanese industry in global market is the car industry and the accumulation of niche. You can summarize that, right? The car industry and the accumulation of niche. And car industry, you can understand, right? Just a very huge car industry, and a Toyota and Honda. And accumulation of niche means the Japanese in Japan, there are so many small middle companies have a very great global niche top products. And global niche top products means very dispensable parts of the global supply chain. And of course, the niche means very small. So GNT, global niche top, is a very small market, but very indispensable parts of the global supply chain. And in this GNT market, the sum of Japanese company takes up 90% of the global share, right? So it's mean the Japanese company is still indispensable in the global supply chain. So that's why Japan is still third biggest company, and in terms of economics, it's still influential, right? But still very stable. So the Japanese economic won't be changed greatly. So that's why I think it is not influential. And in terms of the second question, it's a very difficult, and first of all, I want to say that right now it is pretty difficult to deal with the economics as a totally separate with the politics, right? It's pretty connected with each other. But in terms of only economic, the Japanese economic is very, very dependent on the China, right? China is the main partner with Japan. So the construction is that in terms of the natural security, the Japanese is totally dependent on the US. But in terms of economics, the Japan is dependent on the China. So there is a kind of a twist. So that's why it's sometimes difficult to make balance between China and US. And so in terms of economics, so for Japanese company, so many Japanese companies, the China is a very, very large and important market. Right. But still, there's some scholars and some people and also entrepreneurs care about the country risk in China. Right. For example, so Xinjiang issue, in terms of the Xinjiang issue, for example, Uniqlo and the Mujiyoshi, the stock price was falling down greatly because they couldn't say they stopped using the cotton
That's right.
produced by the Xinjiang, right?
That's right.
Because it was too important for them to maintain the Chinese market, right? And for example, like Nike or other like H&M said, they stopped using the cotton, and after that, in China, like Chinese EC platform and map company deleted them, right? So it's been like Chinese people automatically boycott the Nike or H&M, that kind of company. So that's why some shop had no choice but to close. It was too horrible for the some company in Japan like Uniqlo or Mujushi. So it's a good example, I think. So it's been like the Japanese company feel like a country risk for China, and also FDI, the amount of FDI that FDI means like the director the investment. So the amount is very huge from Japan to China. So that's why some company try to relocate from the China to other country and diverse the other country like Southeast country and Australia or other country.
Alan, I got one more question before we continue to talk about this domestic affairs in Japan. We know recently, and when I say recently, I guess we could trace back in the past couple months, we'll say the past 3 or 4 months, Japan, this Japanese government has been very, I quote, active in poking China by a lot more political affairs. So in other words, some of the matters or some of the issues are being seen as China's domestic affairs. But Japanese government or Japanese, press or foreign affairs department has been very openly criticized China for mishandling those things. My question to you is not about how the Japanese government should react to that, but my question is, why is it over and over again that Japan is showing interest in those Chinese domestic affairs, even though they know that they're heavily dependent on China, and if they lose China, economically speaking, that will be a big loss for the country.
Yes.
So in other words, I mean, do you see my point? Would you like to become a friend with someone? Meanwhile, you always punch the friend where it hurts the most. How would you do that?
And basically, like the famous saying, a quote is like hot economics, the cold politics. Cold politics, hot economics is a very simple terms to illustrate the relationship between China and Japan. It's been like in terms of politics, it's pretty difficult to maintain the good relationship. It might be difficult, right? But in terms of the economics, we should make efforts to build a great relationship with China because it's gonna be a great benefits to both of country, right? So I mean, like I think basically the only I'm not sure, but the Japanese company and the entrepreneur want to maintain the good relationship in terms of the economics, and they think the politics is pretty far from the economics. To think about the relationship with China. So I think the only thing is like the Japanese company in China, keep maintaining keep making the products in China, and also build the loyalty in China to the Chinese people, and also propaganda as they are just making efforts to produce a goods for the Chinese people. So I think that's it. It's pretty difficult to do the new things in terms of the economics for the companies, or Japanese company. So It's just like ordinary efforts for the companies, I think. But it's just the only way right now in terms of economics.
Sure, Alan, I want to read something to you. Let's go back to Japanese domestic affairs. Now, one article came out and it says more than 20% of Japan's population is over 65 years old, and the highest proportion in the world. By 2030, which we're looking at in 8 years, 1 in every 3 people will be 65 or older, and 1 in 5 people will be 75 plus years old. Now, I want to talk to you about this issue because when we are talking about the older people, not only Japan, but also in China and a lot more countries, this is going to be one of the major economic setbacks if we are not going to take care of this issue. So I want to know, in Japan, when we are talking about the younger generations, how does the Japanese government handle the people who are over 65 or over 75? Because if we are not, again, if the Japanese government does not take good care or well care of those people, it could bring economic setbacks or even greater disadvantages to the country. So what do you think?
Okay. Thank you. This is a very, very important part because actually low birth rate and aging society, as you mentioned, is I think one of the most serious issue in Japan, right? And also government for governments, it's difficult to challenge and also reform the kind of situation because of the structural issues. So basically, in Japan, the Japanese political system is supported by based on the election, right? And in terms of the election, and the rate of the people, the rate of voters is very important. And the aging society and low birth rate means the opinion of older generation and elderly people is more important than younger generation for the politician, right? So that's why the Japanese politician usually sees the elderly people. So that's why, it's mean a Japanese politician think about the policy which is good for the elderly people. So sometimes it's bad for the younger generation. And younger generation realize that's called structural issues. So that's why the younger generations sometimes give up to expecting the Japanese politician and gonna be indifferent, they don't care about the election and the Japanese politician. So that kind of ignorance is also problematic. So it's based on the structural issue. And okay.
No, go ahead, Alan. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. And also, I want to say one thing, welfare, right? Now, actually, compare with the other country, Japanese welfare is very stable, and I think it's pretty guaranteeing the minimum level of daily life, right? So Japanese welfare is pretty good compared with the other country, right? There are also so many issues in terms of the welfare in Japan, but basically it's good. But in Japanese welfare system based on the younger generation, right? Younger generation pay the fee of daily life of elderly people. This is a situation of welfare in Japan. But this welfare system has started in the 1950 or 1960 something. And at that time, the Japanese population is growing and never aging society and never low birth rate, right? So the Japanese welfare system is based on the anticipation of a growing population. So that's why it doesn't fit the current situation. So that's why Japanese welfare system is a pretty the difficult situation, and it's not adaptive. It cannot be adaptive to the low birth rate and aging society, but it's difficult to change that huge system. This is the problem, yes.
Alan, we know that for the younger generations, again, not only in Japan, but across the continent, young people today are very active in engaging political and social movement. And also, I realized that younger generations, the millennials today in Japan, they're actually doing the same thing. So my question is it just because the young people are more interested in participating in this political and social movement because they would like to see bigger and greater changes? So that's why they keep on postponing building a family or having children. And we know that the low birth rate since 2020, again, going back to the pandemic, the number has shocked not only the people, the government in Japan, but also in China. There are a lot more countries in Asia today are facing almost the same issue with low birth rate and also family value, the marriage rate, the list can go on and on. Part of the reason because people are interested in joining this political campaign or political movement so that they can have much greater stability in terms of economy or in terms of, social welfare. So from your perspective, is it the same scenario or is it the same thing that the reason why younger generations today are not producing or are not paying attention to the birth rate or not paying attention to the family value structure? Instead, they are joining or they are participating in this modern political movement.
Okay, thank you. So first of all, I want to introduce why the Japanese younger generation don't care about marriage or especially low birth rate, right? So yeah, as you mentioned, I think it's true. Like the Japanese younger generation don't want to produce children, right? Compared with past or other country. I think that because I think the economic situation is one of the most important reason for that. So basically in Japan, the economic disparity between the the old generation and younger generation is bigger and bigger. And younger generation tend to be poor, right? Because of the deflation. And also wage level is decreasing step by step. So that's why younger generation have trouble in the children care and also making a children and nurturing the children. So that's why they can't, right? So this is the main reason. And also the women, from 2000, the women start going the actual workplace as a men do in Japan. So I think it's good. It's good things, but it's mean a woman is basically in workplace but in actual workplace, the situation is not so good for the making it compatible between the children and work for the women. So that's why it is difficult for the woman in workplace to make the children and make it compatible between her career and the children. So this is a basic reason. So this is issues of gender disparity and gender role. And also, you can see the world ranking of Japan in terms of the gender problem. So Japanese ranking is very, very low compared with other countries and OECD. So it's also problematic point.
Alan, I know you're very busy, and also I realize it's kind of late for you, and I really appreciate your time. Now, I got two more questions before letting you go. Alan, I want to talk about social matters. And again, we address political changes, we talk about economic factors, but let's talk about some of the important and critical social matters in Japan. If I'm not mistaken, a couple years ago, that younger generations, particularly in this LGBT community, so in other words, I'm sure that you also you're mindful of this. For so long that this country that has been pushed, I shouldn't say this country, but people, especially the millennials, they've been pushing the Japanese government to legalize gay marriages, and which it's going to be a milestone for this country. Because again, given this option or given the freedom that people are looking at the Western culture, people are looking at other countries or regions in Asia which legalize the gay marriages. Now, I have been to Japan many times and I visited multiple cities in Japan. To me, I believe that the core value of the country has never been fundamentally changed. So from your perspective, Alan, why do you think today the LGBT community are so outspoken regarding the marriage equality? And number two, how likely that for the government agreed to legalize gay marriages in Japan?
Okay, thank you. First of all, I'm happy to hear that you like Japan. You have been many times in Japan.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you. Yes. So first of all, like that, yeah, as you said, the Japanese, I think though, like the core value the Japanese people have hasn't been changed greatly. Yeah, and in terms of the like LGBT community, to advocate their right to get married. Yeah, it's very important, and also, but basically, I think it's pretty natural for the LGBT people. Because LGBT people has been suppressed by the social, like kind of like the social pressure, right? And basically in Japan, the peer social pressure is very, very tough. And because historically Japanese is a kind of like village society and very close and narrow to the community. And in that community, the social peer pressure is very tough, and the people just usually try to follow the norm, like the norm in that community. And if you ignore the norm and the rule in the community, you can be criticized, harshly in the community. So basically, social peer pressure is very, very huge and heavy. And also, LGBT people had trouble in the criticism and the social peer pressure. And they had so many, struggling situation. And also still not right now too, right? So, and for them, like the Western country, like especially US, the movement was very influential. And they saw that U.S. situation and LGBT people gave their voice to the society, and it turns out to be very influential, right? So the LGBT community in Japan, also because of the SNS also influential to build the relationship between the LGBT community, right? Because the LGBT people feel like are very scattered in Japan, but SNS got together then. So it was very very important for them. But the LGBT people realized, okay, this is the timing to give a voice, and of course and also they realized they had to give a voice greatly and publicly. Because if they give a voice privately, it's going to be meaningless because just a social peer pressure that smash up the kind of voice and criticize it. That's it. So that's why they had no choice to give a voice publicly. And also they realized this was a kind of a good timing. And also they expect their power of saying. And related to the second question, and the Japanese government saw that, and also the kind of there are the big movements, the Me Too or like SDGs, and also Z generation. Z generation means like a younger generation, right? The younger generation also very the sensitive to the like political correctness and especially LGBTQ or gender issue, and so the Japanese government is also realizing how important the LGBTQ problem is. And also, if they agreed the community's suggestion, it's gonna be a good reputation for the younger generation, right? So in the long run, it's also very important for the Liberal Democratic Party to show they are pretty understand that their understanding is quite good. Yeah, for the younger generation. So that's why I think that's why they agreed. That's like they're for the LGBTQ's community.
Ellen, I want to wrap up our conversation. The last question, I want to focus on the word called internationalism. Okay. And we know that today, no single country, regardless if you're looking at the countries in Asia or the countries in Europe or the countries in Africa, no single country today cannot be crowned with the word internationalism. Because we know that under this globalization, country is going through this major political and social changes because of internationalism. Now, from your perspective, Japan today, regarding Tokyo or any other, or Osaka, any other major cities, younger generations today are shaping this country in an amazing way. But however, there are still some fundamental values that cannot be changed or should not be changed regardless. So my last question to you is, what are some of the fundamental traditional Japanese value in culture or economy or politics whatsoever should not be changed from your perspective?
Shouldn't be changed, right?
Should not.
Okay. Should not be changed. Okay. Okay, this is very interesting question. And okay. I think that the word is like omotenashi. Have you heard of that?
No,
word?
I have not. Tell us a little bit more.
That's fine. Yeah, omotenashi is a kind of like the very warm way to say welcome in Japanese. And Japanese people is very, very like kind, and also generous for the other people, and especially the foreign people, right? It's based on the omotenashi culture, and omotenashi is like a kind of a great efforts to build a good relationship with others. As you said, that Japan was a kind of like very narrow village, and also transition was not so like usually, and people and people tend to be only one community in entire life. So in that situation, the Japanese it was very, very important to build a good relationship with others and with neighbors for Japanese people. So that's why Japanese people sometimes tend to be shy, or like tend to be shy, and sometimes can't speak English or something like that kind of a problem. But basically, the Japanese people is very kind and generous for the others and foreign people. This is a very fundamental and very attractive culture in Japan. And also, finally, I want to introduce one distinctive culture in Japan. This is said mottainai culture. Mottainai is a kind of like international words nowadays, but I'm not sure. But mottainai culture is also a very distinctive culture in Japan, and mottainai is mean like it's difficult to translate actually. So that's why mottainai is also one of the English. So, but what mottainai is kind of in mottainai culture, like people feel like guilty or shameful if they abandon or threw away many things, right? If, for example, if you threw away the food, like you didn't eat everything, like you just left a little and you threw it away, you feel like a mottainai and you feel like guilty.
Okay, I see.
Kind of like that,
okay.
Right? So that's why, for example, like the technology of recycling is very, very good in Japan. So this is a good example. But the mottai culture means like the Japanese people make much of like the environment, and also they try to make best of the resource. This is a very fundamental, and because Japanese, there are like, for example, lack of the natural resource and the lack of the food or something like that. And at that time, that it was very important for Japanese people to make best of the resource you had. So that's why the mottainai culture has been growing in Japan, and also it's I know it's very traditional values, but still fits in like a current situation and globally. So actually, I want to export the mottainai culture and the concept of mottainai and omotenashi to the international community. So if you come to Japan in next time, yeah, please see that kind of culture.